The pregnant woman was crying in the rain when the millionaire stopped his car. He didn't know this encounter would change his destiny forever. The screeching sound of tires cut through the humid Seattle night air. The silver Aston Martin skidded to a halt, just inches from the lone figure staggering down the deserted street. Alexander Reeves, CEO of Reeves Technologies and one of the richest men in the country, felt his heart race. For a terrifying moment, he thought he had hit someone. He got out of the car, the fine rain soaking his $5,000 Armani suit in seconds. A few steps away, a young woman was leaning on a lamppost, sobbing uncontrollably. Her flowered dress clung to her body, revealing a prominent pregnancy belly. "My God, are you all right? Alexander stopped mid-sentence, realizing that the woman hadn't even noticed him. She seemed to be in another world, lost in her own despair. "Ma'am," he approached cautiously, holding out his hand but not touching her. "Can I help you in any way?" The woman raised her face, her brown eyes wide with surprise and fear. For an instant, Alexander felt as if time had stopped. There was something in that look, a mixture of vulnerability and strength, that hit him like a punch in the gut. I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible under the noise of the rain. Alexander hesitated. His whole life was based on calculated decisions, meticulous plans. He wasn't the kind of man who acted on impulse, but something about that scene, the dark street, the relentless rain, the pregnant and desperate woman, awoke in him a long-dormant feeling. "Come with me," he heard himself say, surprising himself. "I know a safe place where you can stay tonight." The woman stared at him, suspicion evident in her eyes. "Who are you?" "My name is Alexander Reeves. I promise I won't hurt you. I just want to help." For a long moment, she didn't move. Alexander could see the conflict on her face, the fear fighting against the desperate need for help. Finally, with a small nod, she took a step towards him. "Madison," she murmured. "My name is Madison." Alexander gently guided her to the car, opening the passenger door. As she settled into the leather seat, he couldn't help noticing how out of place she looked there, a fragile, wet sight in the midst of ostentatious luxury. He turned around and got into the car, turning the heater on full blast. For a few minutes, they were silent, the only sound being the rain hitting the roof of the vehicle and Madison's ragged breathing. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice still shaky. Alexander hesitated. He hadn't really thought about it. His mind was racing, considering and discarding options. A hotel? No, too impersonal. A shelter? It didn't seem suitable. Then the answer hit him with startling clarity. "My house," he said, surprising himself again. "I have a guest room where you can stay tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out how to help you on a more permanent basis." Madison looked at him, her eyes widening. "Your house? But you don't even know me. What if I'm a criminal or something?" Alexander couldn't help a wry smile. "Well, considering I'm the one taking a stranger home, I guess I'm the one who should be worried, huh?" This drew a small smile from Madison, the first since they had met. It was a brief smile, but it lit up her face in a way that made Alexander's heart skip a beat. While driving through the wet streets of Seattle, Alexander found himself casting furtive glances at his unexpected passenger. Who was this woman? What had brought her to that desperate situation? And why was he, a man known for his coolness in business, acting so impulsively? Madison remained silent, her eyes fixed on the cityscape passing by the window. Her hands rested protectively on her stomach, and Alexander noticed a slight tremor in her fingers. "How long?" he asked softly. Madison turned to him, confused. "What?" "The pregnancy. How long?" "Oh." She lowered her gaze to her belly. 7 months. Alexander nodded, uncertain how to proceed. Casual conversation seemed inappropriate under the circumstances, but silence was also uncomfortable. Do you have family in the city?" he ventured, immediately regretting the question when he saw Madison cringe. "No," she replied simply, turning back to the window. Alexander decided not to press. Clearly, there was a complicated story there, but this wasn't the time to investigate it. After a few more minutes of silence, they arrived at a luxurious condominium in Bellevue, overlooking Lake Washington. Alexander parked in the underground garage and guided Madison to the private elevator. When the doors opened directly onto the penthouse, Madison gasped. The apartment was a study in luxurious minimalism. Clean lines, neutral tones, and stunning views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander nodded, suddenly aware of how his wealth must seem to someone in Madison's situation. "The guest room is this way," he said quickly, leading her down a corridor. The room was spacious and cozy, with a large king-size bed and an ensuite bathroom. Alexander opened a cupboard and took out clean towels and a soft robe. "You might want to dry off and warm up," he said, placing the items on the bed. "There are toiletries in the bathroom. Feel free to use whatever you need. I'll see if I can find some clothes that might fit you." Madison stared at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." Alexander paused in the doorway, considering the question. Why was he doing this? It wasn't like him to act like this, to invite a stranger into his home, to offer help without question. But something about this woman, this situation, had touched him in a way he couldn't explain. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "people need help, and sometimes we have the opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. I have more than I need. If I can help, why shouldn't I?" Madison nodded, tears silently running down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. "Get some rest," he said softly. "We'll talk more tomorrow." He closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. His heart was beating fast. His mind was spinning. What had he done? How would this change his orderly, predictable life? As he walked back to the living room, Alexander couldn't help feeling that something fundamental had changed. That encounter in the rain, that impulsive decision to help, felt like the start of something bigger. Something that could change not only Madison's life, but his too. Standing in front of the window, watching the lights of Seattle flicker in the rainy night, Alexander Reeves, the ruthless titan of business, felt something he hadn't felt for years. Hope. Hope that, perhaps, he could be more than just a rich and powerful man. Maybe he could be someone who really made a difference. With a deep sigh, he turned away from the window. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and revelations. For now, he needed to rest and prepare for whatever fate had in store for him and the mysterious woman sleeping in his guest room. Little did Alexander know that that rainy night in Seattle was just the beginning of a journey that would test his values, challenge his beliefs, and, perhaps, show him the true meaning of compassion and love. As the first rays of sunlight penetrated through the windows of Alexander's apartment, Madison slowly awoke, momentarily disoriented by the luxurious surroundings. Memories of the night before flooded her mind, the rain, the despair, and then him, the kind-eyed stranger who had rescued her from the streets of Seattle. She sat up in bed, her hands instinctively caressing her prominent belly. The baby moved, as if responding to her touch, and Madison felt a wave of love and fear mix in her chest. How had she gotten to this point? How had a promising young woman from Portland ended up pregnant and homeless in Seattle? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Madison!" Alexander's voice sounded from the other side. "Are you awake? I've prepared some breakfast, if you're hungry." Madison hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, I'm awake. I'll be right there." She got up slowly, noticing for the first time the clothes folded on the chair next to the bed, a set of sweatshirts and a baggy t-shirt that seemed to be able to accommodate her belly. After getting dressed and spending a few minutes in the luxurious bathroom, trying to tame her unruly hair, Madison finally gathered the courage to face her unexpected benefactor. As she entered the kitchen, she was greeted by the tantalizing aroma of freshly brewed coffee and something sweet in the oven. Alexander stood with his back to her, stirring something on the stove. Dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, he looked very different from the soggy executive of the night before. "Good morning," Madison said softly, making Alexander turn around. "Good morning," he replied with a warm smile. "I hope you slept well. Sit down, please. Coffee's almost ready." Madison settled on one of the high stools at the kitchen counter, watching Alexander move around the space with ease. There was a familiarity in his movements that surprised her. She had expected a man of his standing to have a team of staff to take care of domestic chores. "Do you always cook?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her shyness. Alexander laughed softly as he placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Not always. In fact, I rarely have time. But today seemed like a good day to return to old habits." He sat down on the other side of the counter, his own plate in front of him. For a few moments, they ate in silence, Madison savoring every bite of the perfectly golden pancakes. "So," Alexander finally broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Madison swallowed dryly, putting her fork aside. She knew this moment would come, but she still felt unprepared. Where to begin? How to explain the series of events and choices that had led her to this point? She began, her voice breaking. "I don't know where to start." Alexander watched her with compassionate eyes. "How about the beginning? How did you end up on that street last night?" Madison took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I'm from Portland," she began. "I was in college, studying nursing. Everything was going well. I had plans, dreams." She paused, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. "Then I met Jason." Alexander listened intently, his face a mask of concentration. "Jason was charismatic, charming. He made me feel special, loved. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified, but he promised that we would be together, that we would start a family." Madison laughed bitterly. "How naive of me." "What happened?" Alexander asked softly. "He disappeared. One day he was there, making plans for our future. The next, poof, he disappeared. He deleted all his social networks, changed his number. It was as if he'd never existed." Alexander frowned, a shadow of anger flashing across his eyes. "What about his family?" Madison lowered her gaze, focusing on her hands resting on her stomach. "My parents, they're very religious. When I told them about the pregnancy, about Jason disappearing, they gave me an ultimatum: abort or leave home." "My God," Alexander muttered, shocked. "I couldn't do it," Madison continued, her voice breaking. "I couldn't. This baby, he's innocent in all this. So I took what I could carry and came to Seattle. I thought I could start over here, get a job, get by. But it wasn't that easy," Alexander concluded softly. Madison shook her head, the tears finally falling. "No, the jobs I got didn't pay enough for rent. I stayed in shelters for a while, but it's hard. Yesterday, when you found me, I had just been kicked out of the room I was renting. The landlord found out I was pregnant and said he didn't want any trouble." Alexander held out his hand, hesitated for a moment, and then gently covered Madison's hand with his own. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that. No one deserves such treatment." Madison looked up, meeting Alexander's eyes. There was an intensity there, a compassion that took her by surprise. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, echoing her question from the night before. "You could have just left me there or taken me to a shelter." Alexander withdrew his hand, running it through his hair in what appeared to be a nervous gesture. "Honestly, I don't know. Something about that scene, you alone in the rain, reminded me of something." "Of what?" Madison asked softly, intrigued by the sudden vulnerability in his voice. Alexander was silent for a long moment, as if debating internally whether to share. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and charged with emotion. "My sister, she was pregnant when she died. A car accident. I was too busy with my business. I didn't give her the attention she deserved. When I got the call," he stopped, swallowing. "Well, let's just say there are certain things money can't fix." Madison felt her heart squeeze at the pain evident in Alexander's words. Instinctively, she reached out, lightly touching his arm. "I'm sorry for your loss." Alexander offered a sad smile. "It was a long time ago, but I think that somehow helping you is a way of, I don't know, maybe make peace with the past." They were silent for a few moments, the weight of the revelations hanging between them. Finally, Alexander straightened up, his expression becoming more determined. "Well, the question now is, how can we improve your situation? You mentioned that you were studying nursing. Is that something you'd still like to do?" Madison blinked, surprised by the sudden change of subject. Yes, I'd love to. But with the baby coming, I don't know how." "Leave that to me," Alexander interrupted gently. "I know people at the University of Washington. I'm sure we can work something out, maybe a flexible study program or online." But what about housing? What about expenses? I can't accept." "Madison," Alexander interrupted her again, his voice firm but gentle. "You're in a difficult situation, but not an impossible one. Let me help. Consider this, an investment in your future and that of your baby." Madison felt the tears come again, this time of gratitude and hope. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." Alexander smiled. "Just promise that you'll try hard, that you'll do your best. And one day, when you're settled, pass that kindness on. Help someone who needs it, like I'm trying to help you now." At that moment, sitting in the luxurious kitchen of a man who was practically a stranger, Madison felt something she hadn't felt for months. Hope. Hope for a better future, for a chance to fulfill her dreams, to give her baby the life he deserved. "I promise," she said softly, her voice charged with emotion. Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "Good. Now, how about another pancake? We have a lot to plan." As Alexander got up to get more food, Madison couldn't help thinking how life could change in an instant. Yesterday, she was alone and desperate. Today, she had an unexpected ally and a glimpse of a better future. What would tomorrow bring? She didn't know. But for the first time in months, Madison was eager to find out. As the days turned into weeks, Madison found herself plunged into a new routine that, although initially disconcerting, gradually began to feel right. Alexander, true to his word, had moved mountains to help her resume her studies. Through his connections, he managed to enroll her in a flexible online nursing program at the University of Washington, allowing her to continue her education while preparing for the baby's arrival. The guest apartment in Alexander's luxury condominium in Bellevue had become their temporary home. It was a modest space compared to the rest of the apartment, but for Madison, it was a palace compared to the shelters and rented rooms where she had spent the last few months. That Saturday morning, Madison was sitting on the small balcony of her room, a cup of ginger tea balanced on her ever-growing belly as she leafed through one of her study books. The sound of a soft knock on the door made her look up. "May I come in?" Alexander's voice sounded from the other side. "Of course," Madison replied, closing her book and settling into her chair. Alexander entered, carrying a small box in his hands. He looked nervous, something unusual for the normally confident businessman. "I, brought you something," he said, holding out the box. Curious, Madison took the box and opened it carefully. Inside was a state-of-the-art smartphone. She looked at Alexander, confused. "I realized you didn't have a cell phone," he explained quickly. "I thought it would be useful for your studies, for keeping in touch with your teachers, and, well, for any emergencies." Madison felt a lump form in her throat. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. "Alexander, this is too much. You've already done so much." "Please," he interrupted gently. "Accept it. Consider it a necessary tool for your studies." After a moment's hesitation, Madison nodded, a shy smile forming on her lips. "Thank you. That means a lot." Alexander smiled, looking relieved. He sat down in the chair next to her, his gaze wandering to the view of the city. How are your studies going? Fine, Madison replied, her enthusiasm evident in her voice. It's challenging, especially with the baby on the way, but it's nice to have a purpose again, you know? Alexander nodded, understanding. And how are you feeling? The baby. We're both fine, Madison smiled, stroking her belly. I have an appointment next week for an ultrasound. I'll finally know if it's a boy or a girl. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the city below. Madison squinted at Alexander, noticing how he seemed more relaxed, less formal than when they first met. There was something in his expression, a softness she hadn't seen before. Alexander, she began hesitantly, can I ask you a personal question? He turned to her, arching an eyebrow. Of course. Why didn't you ever get married, or had children? The question seemed to take Alexander by surprise. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the city. When he finally spoke, his voice was charged with an emotion that Madison couldn't fully identify. I guess I lost my way, he said softly. I spent so much time building my empire that I forgot to build a life. And when I finally realized that, he paused, sighing. Well, let's just say I thought it was too late. Madison felt a wave of empathy for him. It's never too late, she said gently. Alexander turned to her, a sad smile on his lips. Maybe you're right, but what about you? Any regrets about all this? He gestured vaguely towards his belly. Madison considered the question for a moment. Honestly, no. Of course, it wasn't how I planned it, but this baby, she stroked her belly again. He or she is the best thing that's ever happened to me. It made me stronger. It made me fight. And it brought me here. Alexander's eyes softened, an expression Madison couldn't decipher passing across his face. You're an extraordinary woman, Madison. Your baby is lucky to have you as a mother. Madison felt her cheeks heat up at the compliment. Thank you, and thank you again for everything you're doing for us. Alexander waved his hand, as if dismissing the thanks. It's the least I can do. Actually, He stopped, looking suddenly nervous again. I was thinking, if you want, of course, could I accompany you to the ultrasound appointment? Just for support, that's all. Madison blinked, surprised by the request. Part of her wanted to say that it wasn't necessary, that she could handle it on her own. But another part, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, welcomed the offer. I'd like that, she replied softly. Thank you. The smile that lit up Alexander's face was dazzling. Great, it's a date then. As soon as the words left his mouth, Alexander seemed to realize what he had said. His cheeks flushed red, something Madison found surprisingly adorable in the normally composed businessman. I mean, not a date, just an appointment. A doctor's appointment. You understand? He stammered, looking more uncomfortable than Madison had ever seen him. Madison couldn't hold back a laugh. I understand, Alexander. Don't worry. He stood up abruptly, still looking uncomfortable. Well, there are some emails I need to answer. See you at dinner? Madison nodded, still smiling. Of course. See you later. After Alexander left, Madison leaned back in her chair, her thoughts a whirlwind. What was going on here? She had come to this apartment as a stranger in need of help. Now, less than a month later, she found herself looking forward to the moments she spent with Alexander, enjoying his company in a way that went beyond mere gratitude. She shook her head, trying to push these thoughts away. It was ridiculous. Alexander was her benefactor, nothing more. He was just being kind, fulfilling a promise he had made to himself in memory of his dead sister. There was nothing more to it. Right? With a sigh, Madison turned her attention back to her study book. She had work to do, a future to build for herself and her baby. There was no room in her life for impossible romantic fantasies. But as she tried to concentrate on the words on the page, her mind kept going back to Alexander's smile, to the way his eyes lit up when he spoke to her. And, despite her best efforts, Madison couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if there was something else going on here? What if, against all the odds, she was finding not just a savior, but something more? Shaking her head once more, Madison forced herself to concentrate on her book. Now was not the time for such thoughts. She had a life to rebuild, a baby to prepare for. Whatever the future held, it would have to wait. But even so, as the hours passed and the afternoon turned into evening, Madison couldn't help the small smile that played on her lips, or the warm feeling that spread through her chest every time she thought of Alexander. Maybe, just maybe, fate had more surprises in store for her than she could ever have imagined. The day of the ultrasound appointment arrived more quickly than Madison had expected. As she sat in the clinic's waiting room, her restless hands repeatedly smoothed the fabric of her blouse over her prominent belly. Alexander, sitting next to her, seemed almost as nervous as she was, his fingers drumming silently on the arm of the chair. "Is everything all right?" Madison asked softly, noticing the tension in his shoulders. Alexander turned to her, a forced smile on his face. "Yes, of course. Just a bit anxious, I guess." "It's a big deal, isn't it?" Madison nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for his presence. Over the last few weeks, Alexander had become more than just her benefactor. He was her friend, her confidant, a constant, comforting presence in her tumultuous life. "Madison Carter?" The nurse's voice echoed through the waiting room. Madison stood up, Alexander right behind her. As they walked to the examination room, she felt his hand brush lightly against her back, a gesture so subtle it could have been accidental, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Lying on the gurney with the cold gel on her belly, Madison held her breath as the ultrasound technician moved the transducer over her skin. The rhythmic sound of the baby's heart filled the room, and Madison felt tears forming in her eyes. "Look," the technician smiled, pointing at the screen. "There's your baby." Madison turned her head to look, her breath catching in her throat. There, on the black and white screen, was her son. She could see the profile of the face, the tiny hands, the tiny feet kicking. "Alexander," she whispered, reaching out blindly. Without hesitation, he took it, his fingers entwining with hers. "It's incredible," he murmured, his voice tinged with emotion. The technician smiled at the couple. "Would you like to know the sex?" Madison looked at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, please," she replied. There was a moment of suspense as the technician moved the transducer, looking for the right angle. Finally, she smiled. "Congratulations, it's a girl." Madison felt the tears run down her cheeks. A girl. She was going to have a daughter. "A little girl," Alexander whispered, his voice full of admiration. When Madison looked at him, she was surprised to see tears in his eyes too. The rest of the consultation passed in a blur. Madison barely registered the technician's explanations about the baby's development, her brain still trying to process the reality that in a few months she would be the mother of a little girl. When they finally left the clinic, Madison felt like she was floating. Alexander gently guided her to the car, his hand never leaving her back. "So," he said as he drove back to the apartment, "a girl. Have you thought of names?" Madison smiled, her hands caressing her belly. "Actually, yes. I was thinking of Sophia. It means wisdom." Alexander nodded, a soft smile on his lips. "Sophia. It's a beautiful name." They fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Madison couldn't help noticing how different Alexander looked. Softer, more open. It was as if the sight of the baby had broken down some invisible barrier between them. Suddenly, Alexander made an unexpected turn, leaving the familiar route back to the apartment. "Where are we going?" Madison asked, curious. "I thought, well, maybe we could celebrate?" Alexander replied, a touch of nervousness in his voice. "There's a little cafe not far from here. They make the best waffles in town." Madison felt her heart racing. This sounded dangerously like a date. "That would be great," she replied softly. The cafe was exactly as Alexander had described. Small, cozy, and smelling divinely of freshly brewed coffee and waffles. Sitting at a corner table, Madison found herself relaxing, laughing at the stories Alexander told about his early days as an entrepreneur. So there I was, 20-something, thinking I had all the answers. He laughed, shaking his head. God, I was so arrogant. And now, Madison teased, a smile playing on her lips. Alexander looked at her, his eyes softening. Now I know I don't have all the answers. In fact, the older I get, the less certain I am. There was something in his tone, a vulnerability that made Madison's heart squeeze. Without thinking, she reached out, covering his hand on the table. Sometimes, not having all the answers is good, she said softly. It leaves room for surprises. Alexander's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to disappear around them. Madison felt her heart racing, aware of how easy it would be to lean forward, to close the distance between them. The sound of plates being placed on the table broke the moment. Madison pulled her hand back, feeling her cheeks heat up as the waitress placed their orders in front of them. The rest of the meal passed in a mixture of light conversation and charged silences. Madison couldn't help but notice how Alexander's eyes seemed to gravitate towards her whenever she wasn't looking, or how his smile seemed a little brighter every time she laughed at one of his jokes. When they finally returned to the apartment, the sun was already setting, painting the Seattle sky in shades of pink and gold. Standing in the doorway of Madison's room, there was a tension in the air, an unspoken expectation. "Thank you for today," Madison said softly. "For everything." Alexander smiled, his gaze soft. "It's been a pleasure, and thank you for letting me be a part of it. It's special." There was a moment of silence, filled with unspoken possibilities. Madison felt her heart pounding in her chest, aware of how easy it would be to lean forward, to eliminate the distance between them. But then the moment passed. Alexander took a step back, his smile a little forced. "Good night, Madison. Get some rest." "Good night, Alexander," she replied, watching him walk away down the corridor. Closing the door behind her, Madison leaned against it, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. What was going on between them? Was it just gratitude on her part? Compassion on his part? Or was there something more, something deeper developing? Lying in bed that night, her hands caressing her belly where her daughter, Sophia, was growing, Madison couldn't help but wonder about the future. What would the coming months bring? How would her life change when the baby was born? And Alexander? What role would he play in all of this? With a sigh, Madison closed her eyes, letting sleep take her. Tomorrow would be another day, with its own challenges and surprises. For now, she would allow herself to dream of a bright-eyed little girl and, perhaps, of a pair of dark eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Madison was eager to find out what it held. The weeks turned into months, and the Seattle summer gave way to a vibrant fall. As the leaves changed color, Madison felt her own life transforming in ways she could never have imagined. That Saturday morning, Madison was sitting in the main living room of Alexander's apartment, surrounded by books and notes. Her laptop was open in front of her, displaying a half-finished essay on nursing ethics. At 8 months pregnant, she was finding it increasingly difficult to concentrate, her body and mind constantly distracted by the changes ahead. Alexander entered the room, 2 steaming cups in his hands. "I thought you could use some tea," he said, placing a cup on the table next to her. Madison smiled gratefully. "You're a lifesaver." He sat down on the sofa next to her, his eyes roaming over the scattered books. "How's the study going?" "Slowly," Madison sighed, closing her laptop. "It's hard to concentrate when it feels like there's a soccer player in my belly." Alexander laughed softly. "Is Sophia agitated today?" "As usual," Madison smiled, stroking her belly. "I think she's eager to get out and explore the world." There was a moment of comfortable silence as they both sipped their tea. Madison couldn't help noticing how these quiet moments had become increasingly frequent and precious over the last few weeks. The dynamic between them had changed subtly, evolving from a relationship of benefactor and beneficiary to something deeper, more complex. "Madison," Alexander began, his voice soft but serious, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you." She turned to him, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" Alexander placed his cup on the table, his hands intertwining in his lap. "I've been thinking about what will happen when Sophia is born. About your future. Her future." Madison felt her heart racing. She had thought about it a lot too, but had avoided bringing it up, afraid of putting too much pressure on Alexander's generosity. "I know I can't stay here forever," she began, but Alexander gently interrupted her. "Actually, that's exactly what I want to talk about." He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "I'd like you to stay, not just for a few weeks after Sophia's birth, but permanently." Madison blinked, surprised. "Alexander, I can't accept that. You've already done so much for me, for us. Please listen to me," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "These last few months, having you here, have changed my life, Madison. For the first time in years, I feel alive, complete." Madison felt her breath catch. There was an intensity in Alexander's gaze that she had never seen before. "I know it may sound crazy," he continued, "but I want to be a part of your lives, not just as a benefactor or a distant friend, but more, much more." "Alexander," Madison whispered, her heart beating so hard that she was sure he could hear it. "What are you saying?" He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Madison. With you and with this little girl I haven't even met yet. And I know it's complicated, that there's a lot at stake, but I can't imagine my life without the two of you in it." Madison felt tears forming in her eyes. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms, to tell him that she too had fallen in love with him. But another part, the cautious part that had been hurt before, hesitated. "Alexander, I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected." He squeezed her hands gently. "You don't have to say anything now. I know it's a lot to process. I just want you to know that, regardless of your feelings for me, my offer stands. This is your home, Sophia's home, for as long as you like." Madison nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Alexander stood up slowly, giving her space. "I'll let you think about it," he said softly. "Take all the time you need." After he left, Madison leaned back on the sofa, her mind spinning. Alexander's last words echoed in her ears. A home. He was offering her and Sophia not just a place to stay, but a real home. She thought back over the last few months, the nights spent talking late, the laughs shared over breakfast, the way Alexander's eyes lit up every time she entered the room. She thought of his kindness, the way he always put her needs first, how he had become her confidant, her support, her heart leapt as the realization hit her. She loved him too. Perhaps she had loved him for some time, but fear and uncertainty had prevented her from recognizing it. With a shaky sigh, Madison stood up, one hand resting on her stomach. "What do you think, Sophia?" she whispered. "Should we give this a chance?" As if in answer, she felt a sharp kick. Madison laughed softly. "I think that's a yes." With determined steps, she made her way to Alexander's office. Standing in the doorway, she watched him for a moment. He was sitting at his desk, his head down, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "Alexander," she called softly. He looked up, hope and apprehension mixed in his eyes. "Madison, She crossed the room, stopping in front of him. "You were right," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's complicated. There's a lot at stake, but..." She took his hand, placing it on her stomach. "We also can't imagine our life without you in it." The smile that lit up Alexander's face was dazzling. He stood up, pulling her as close as his belly would allow. "Are you sure?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Madison nodded, tears of happiness running down her cheeks. "I am. We love you, Alexander. I love you." With a soft moan, Alexander leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a soft kiss, full of promise and hope. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Madison felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she could see a clear future ahead of her, a future full of love, family, and endless possibilities. "So," Alexander smiled, his forehead resting against hers, "what do we do now?" Madison smiled back, feeling lighter than she had ever felt before. Now we live, Alexander, together." And as the autumn sun set over Seattle, casting a golden glow through the office windows, Madison knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. She, Alexander, and little Sophia, an unlikely family united by love and fate. A baby's high-pitched cry cut through the early morning silence, echoing through the corridors of the apartment. Madison opened her eyes, instantly alert, despite the tiredness weighing on her bones. Before she could move, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Rest," Alexander murmured sleepily. "I will." Madison smiled gratefully in the darkness, watching Alexander's silhouette get up and walk silently out of the room. She let her eyes close again, but kept an eye on the sounds coming through the baby monitor. "Hello, little princess," Alexander's soft voice sounded through the device. "What's wrong? Are you hungry? Or do you just want a bit of company, eh?" Sophia's crying gradually subsided, turning into small hiccups and finally into soft chirps. Madison felt her heart fill with love as she heard Alexander softly humming a lullaby. 3 months had passed since Sophia's birth, and each day seemed to bring new surprises and challenges. The transition to fatherhood hadn't been easy for Alexander. There had been nights of insecurity, moments of panic when Sophia fell ill, and tense discussions about routines and responsibilities. But through it all, their love only grew stronger. Madison turned over in bed, her eyes landing on the framed photograph on the bedside table. The picture captured the moment they brought Sophia home for the first time, Alexander holding the baby reverently, his eyes shining with unshed tears, while Madison, still in hospital, smiled radiantly at the camera. The sound of soft footsteps announced Alexander's return. He slid back into bed, pulling Madison close. "Is she all right?" Madison asked, nestling against his chest. "Perfectly fine," Alexander replied, placing a kiss on her forehead. "I think she just wanted a bit of attention, just like her mother." Madison playfully patted his arm, laughing softly. "Silly." They were silent for a moment, just enjoying each other's closeness. "You know," Alexander began, his voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking." Madison murmured, already feeling sleep approaching again. "Maybe it's time we made a change." That woke her up completely. She propped herself up on one elbow, staring at him in the dim light. "What kind of change?" Alexander took a deep breath. "I love this apartment, but I don't think it's the ideal place to raise a family. I was thinking maybe we could look for a house, something with a yard, maybe near a park." Madison felt a mixture of emotions, excitement, anxiety, a touch of fear. "Do you want us to move?" "Only if you want to," Alexander replied quickly. "It's just an idea. I thought we could give Sophia more room to grow, to play. And," he paused, his voice becoming softer, "maybe we could think about expanding our family in the future." Madison's heart leapt. They had never discussed having more children. The idea frightened and thrilled her at the same time. "Alexander," she whispered, "do you want more children?" He intertwined his fingers with hers. "I want everything with you, Madison. A house full of laughter, a yard full of toys, a lifetime of memories. But only if it's what you want too." Madison felt tears forming in her eyes. Just over a year ago, she was alone, pregnant and hopeless. Now, here she was, with a man who loved her unconditionally, a beautiful daughter, and the promise of a bright future. "I do," she replied, her voice tinged with emotion. "I want it all with you." Alexander pulled her into a deep kiss, full of promise and passion. When they broke apart, they were both panting and smiling. "Then it's settled," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll start looking for our new home." Madison nodded, nestling back against him. As sleep began to envelop her, she couldn't help thinking about how unpredictable life was. A chance meeting on a rainy night had changed the course of their lives forever. In the days that followed, between bottles and diapers, Madison and Alexander spent hours researching houses online, discussing neighborhoods and schools. Every property they saw brought new possibilities, new dreams for the future. One sunny Saturday afternoon, while Alexander was feeding Sophia and Madison was leafing through a real estate catalog, the phone rang. It was the real estate agent they had hired. "Mrs. Carter, I have great news. I just received a listing that I think would be perfect for you. It's a lovely house on Mercer Island, overlooking the lake. It has 4 bedrooms, a large backyard, and is just a few blocks from a park." Madison exchanged an excited glance with Alexander. "Can we see it today?" "Of course," the agent replied. "I can meet you there in an hour, if that's okay." After hanging up, there was a flurry of activity, changing Sophia, packing the baby's bag, finding the car keys. In the midst of the chaos, Madison paused for a moment, watching Alexander make faces at Sophia, making her laugh. "Hey," she called softly. When he looked up, she smiled. "I love you, both of you." The smile Alexander gave her was dazzling. "We love you too." As they drove to Mercer Island, the sun shining on the waters of Lake Washington, Madison felt a surge of optimism. It didn't matter if this house was right for them or not. What mattered was that they were together, building a life, a future. As they arrived at the address, Madison felt her breath get lost. The house was beautiful, a 2-story craftsman-style structure with a wide porch and large windows. The backyard was exactly as she had imagined, with more than enough space for swings and toy houses. As the agent guided them through the house, Madison could see Alexander's eyes sparkling with possibilities. He pointed to spaces where they could put up a Christmas tree, discussed ideas for a home office, imagined a playroom in the attic. When they reached the master bedroom, with its panoramic view of the lake, Madison knew this was their home. This was the place where they would raise Sophia, where they would possibly welcome more children, where they would build a life together. "What do you think?" Alexander asked softly, Sophia sleeping peacefully in his arms. Madison turned to him, tears of happiness in her eyes. "I think we've found our home." That night, back at the apartment, as they put Sophia to bed, Madison and Alexander couldn't contain their excitement. They talked until late, planning changes, discussing wall colors, dreaming about the future. And when they finally lay down, holding each other, Madison felt a peace she had never experienced before. She had found her place in the world, not just a home, but a family, a love, a purpose. As sleep enveloped her, Madison smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures. But with Alexander by her side and Sophia in her arms, she knew she could face anything. The future had never looked so bright. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen of their new home on Mercer Island, mingling with the smell of toast and the melodious laughter of a child. Madison smiled, watching Sophia, now 4, help Alexander prepare breakfast. "Careful, princess," Alexander laughed, holding Sophia as she poured cereal into a bowl with more enthusiasm than precision. "Mom will think we're trying to feed an army." Madison approached, planting a kiss on Sophia's cheek and another on Alexander's lips. "Good morning, my loves." "Mommy," Sophia exclaimed, her eyes shining. "Daddy said we're going to the park today." "Really?" Madison raised an eyebrow at Alexander, who shrugged with a mischievous grin. "I thought we could enjoy the day as a family," he explained. "The weather's perfect, and—" He was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Exchanging a confused glance with Madison, Alexander went to answer the door, Sophia at his heels. Madison followed, curious. When she reached the entrance hall, she was paralyzed. Standing in the doorway, looking nervous and a little older, was a face she had never expected to see again. Jason, Sophia's biological father. "Oh, Madison?" Jason stammered, his eyes wide with surprise. I didn't know I'd find you here. It took me months to track down your whereabouts and... What are you doing here?" Madison's voice came out firmer than she felt inside. She felt Alexander move to her side, a protective, comforting presence. Jason swallowed dryly, his eyes moving nervously between Madison, Alexander, and Sophia, who watched them with childlike curiosity. I came to apologize, and," he hesitated, "to meet my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison felt her heart soar, a mixture of anger, fear, and confusion flooding her. "Sophia, darling," Alexander said softly, breaking the silence. "Why don't you go and finish your breakfast? Mom and I need to talk to this gentleman." Sophia, sensing the tension in the air, nodded silently and returned to the kitchen. As soon as she was out of sight, Madison turned to Jason, her voice quivering with restrained emotion. "You have no right to show up like that, after all these years. Sophia has a father, and it's not you." Jason lowered his gaze, the guilt evident on his face. "I know, I made a terrible mistake, but I've changed, Madison. I've spent the last few years regretting leaving you. I just want a chance to get to know you." Alexander, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "I don't think this is a conversation we should be having on the doorstep. Why don't we go inside and have a civilized chat?" Madison cast a grateful glance at Alexander. Even in the midst of chaos, he remained calm, always the anchor she needed. Over the next few minutes, sitting in the living room, a tense conversation unfolded. Jason explained how he had panicked when he found out about the pregnancy, how he had run away out of fear and immaturity. He talked about years of regret, therapy, and finally gathering the courage to try to make things right. Madison listened to him in silence, her emotions oscillating between anger at his abandonment and a reluctant understanding of his regret. Alexander stood beside her, his hand firmly entwined with hers, offering silent support. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jason concluded, his voice breaking. "I don't even expect to be a part of your lives. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and if Sophia ever wants to know about your origins, I'll be here." There was a moment of heavy silence after Jason's words. Madison exchanged a glance with Alexander, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Madison spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Jason, what you did hurt deeply, but it also led me to Alexander, to this life that I love. I can't say that I forgive you completely, but I understand that people can change." She paused, taking a deep breath. "As for Sophia, she's too young to understand all this now. But when she's older, if she wants to meet you, we won't stop her. Until then, though, we need you to respect our boundaries." Jason nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. Thank you for listening." After Jason left, Madison collapsed on the sofa, emotionally exhausted. Alexander wrapped his arms around her, gently kissing her forehead. "You were amazing," he murmured. Madison looked up at him, gratitude and love overflowing in her heart. "We were incredible. I don't know what I'd do without you." At that moment, Sophia entered the room, her big eyes full of curiosity. "Mom? Dad? Who was that man?" Madison and Alexander exchanged a look. This was a conversation they knew they would have to have eventually, but they didn't expect it to be so soon. "Come here, princess," Alexander called, opening his arms. Sophia ran to them, nestling between her parents. "That man," Madison began softly, "is someone from Mom's past. Someone who helped bring you into this world." "Like Daddy?" Sophia asked innocently. Alexander smiled, kissing the top of Sophia's head. "Not exactly, darling. You see, sometimes families are formed in different ways. What's important is the love we have for each other." As they gently explained to Sophia about different types of families and how love is what really matters, Madison felt a wave of gratitude. Despite the surprise and stress of that morning, she knew that they had handled the situation in the best possible way. Later that day, as she watched Alexander and Sophia playing in the park, laughing and running in the fall sunshine, Madison reflected on how unpredictable life was. Jason's sudden appearance could have rocked her world, but instead it only strengthened her certainty that this was the life she was meant to have. As they walked back to the house, Sophia between them holding her hands, Madison looked at Alexander. Their gazes met, a silent understanding passing between them. No matter what the future held, they would face it together. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Madison and Alexander sat on the back porch, watching the stars reflected in the calm waters of the lake. "You know," Alexander said softly, "today made me think about family, about the future." Madison turned to him, curious. "What do you mean?" Alexander smiled, taking her hand. "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we made it official. Madison Carter, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" Tears of joy shone in Madison's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." As they kissed under the starry sky, Madison knew that, no matter what life had in store for them, they were ready. Together, they could face anything. The future was bright, full of promise and possibilities, and Madison couldn't wait to see what came next. The soft sound of classical music filled the air, mingling with the murmur of animated conversations and the clink of glasses. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in Seattle was elegantly decorated, white and gold flowers adorning each table, candles flickering softly. Madison was standing in an adjoining room, her reflection in the full-length mirror revealing a stunning wedding dress, a delicate lace pattern that hugged her curves before opening into a flowing skirt. Her hair was tied up in an elaborate bun, adorned with tiny white flowers. "You look absolutely stunning," said Emma, her best friend and godmother, adjusting her veil. Madison smiled, a mixture of nervousness and excitement making her heart race. "I can't believe this day is finally here." The door opened softly, and Sophia walked in, a 6-year-old angel in her little bridesmaid dress. "Mom, you look like a princess." Madison knelt down, hugging her daughter carefully so as not to wrinkle her dress. "And you, my love, look like a magical fairy." Just then, there was a knock on the door. "May I come in?" Alexander's voice sounded from the other side. Emma laughed. "No way! It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony." "Not even for a minute," Alexander pleaded, making Madison and Sophia laugh. "Go get ready," Madison called out, smiling. "We'll see you at the altar." As the minutes ticked by and the time for the ceremony drew closer, Madison felt a surprising calm envelop her. This wedding was more than just a formality. It was the celebration of an incredible journey, of a love that had overcome all obstacles. Finally, the moment arrived. With Sophia leading the way, scattering flower petals, and Emma close behind, Madison walked down the aisle. Her eyes met those of Alexander, who was waiting for her at the altar, and the world seemed to disappear around them. Alexander looked magnificent in his tuxedo, but it was his smile, the smile that had brightened Madison's darkest days, that made her heart leap. When she reached the altar, Alexander took her hands, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You look absolutely stunning," he whispered. The ceremony was a blur of emotions, vows exchanged in broken voices, laughter and tears shared, and finally, the kiss that officially sealed their union. During the reception, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Madison rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, feeling complete. "Happy," Alexander murmured in her ear.